go ahead and get started. So just cover the quick overview of the agenda. Just one thing, kind of housekeeping before we get started. There's a Q&A and chat options within the WebEx interface. You'll be muted the whole time, so if you have any questions for Bob or for me or for any of the presenters today, go ahead and get those entered in the QA area. If you've got any issues or concerns, things like that, go ahead and put those in the chat, and someone will be monitoring those as we go through. So anyway, on to the introduction. So thanks for joining. Getting started with the group, we had a couple of fumbles last year. Co-presenter took a new role, and that led to things kind of getting slowed down after the beginning of last year. So Bob and I are excited about getting this going again. In general, just want to cover some high-level things. The purpose of the embedding analytics group is to focus on, not surprisingly, embedded analytics, which is a different focus from a lot of the other groups out there. Plenty of groups out there that cover the basics of server administration, that cover visualization, best practices, all of those sorts of things. It's less common for people covering things that are purely about embedding, and that's really what we're going to try and focus on. We know there's a lot of great content out there, some interesting case stories, and something of a unique set of needs and desires from the platform. And by organizing and getting everybody together here, we can figure out what those priorities are and help drive the information up to product management. Kind of to make that stuff all work, we're really going to hope that you guys who are attending can really get involved in the participation. So that's presenting topics, either case studies or technical aspects of embedding that you've worked through. Bob has taken the lead on that today, and you're going to be covering some interesting stuff that he's doing at SEDC. Looking out to the future, we're targeting July 9th for the next meeting. And so go ahead and mark your calendars for that now. And hopefully we'll get some great content lined up for that one as well. For Q4, that one is probably, we will definitely have a meeting, but the specifics of that are up in the air a little bit. Need to figure out what's going to happen with the new virtual TC to figure out dates and formats and all the rest of those things. At the end, I'll share a Google form that has some questions that we'd like you to fill out if you can, to get some ideas of what you're looking for. Because obviously, if the content is not of interest to you, then you're not going to want to participate. So we want to make sure that you've got a lot of feedback into what we're targeting and how we're going to move forward. So anyway, that's pretty quick and to the point. But I think we're probably ready to move on to our first presenter. Bob, any follow-ups on the intro before we pass it off to Ruhab?
No, I would just say that I really do hope that everyone contributes, because that's the only way that we're really going to be able to make a difference and get our needs addressed, is through us communicating that in sort of a unified way. So I would just encourage everyone to be involved, reach out to us, contact us. You know, we're happy to communicate. So other than that, I say we move on.
Yeah, and our emails will be on the wrap-up slide at the end. All right. So for now, I will pass that off to Ruhab.
Great, thank you, Jeff and Bob for hosting, and appreciate everyone else for making the time to join us this morning. Jeff, can you just make me the presenter? Perfect. Now I am going to start sharing my screen. So just a quick introduction on myself. So my name is Ruhab Marcus, and I'm the Director of Product for Ask Data, based in Palo Alto, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area, if you're not familiar with that city. And I've been at Tableau for a little bit over 2 years now. I actually just hit my 2-year mark last week, so time is flying. And as many of you, like many of you, I'm working from home during this peculiar time. And I'm entering, I think, week 10 of working from home, but it feels like week 100. But I'm making the best of the situation working from home. So a little introduction to Ask Data, if you're not familiar with this capability in Tableau. Ask Data provides natural language querying directly integrated into the Tableau platform. So the idea is to give non-technical business users a really quick and easy way to get to their answers faster using natural language. So using Ask Data, it starts with a question. So I type a question in, like total sales for each region, and there's a lot of magic that happens behind the scenes from a natural language processing perspective to understand the intent, and then ultimately produce the Tableau visualization as the result. And before I get into the embedding aspect of Ask Data, I just want to spend a few quick minutes to kind of just orient ourselves on just the capability and what it's able to do. So as I mentioned earlier, Ask Data is a natural language interface to the data in Tableau. So here I'm just using the Superstore example, but we'll use some more exciting examples in the embedding part of the demo. So I can immediately start exploring my data leveraging natural language. So I can ask for the average profit for each state in this data source. And you can see that Tableau comes back with interpretations of each question so that it's really clear as to how the system is understanding that question. And we can see that it automatically picked a map because we're talking about geospatial data here. We can also continue the conversation and ask follow-up questions while keeping the context of what you've already asked. So if I only care about 2 specific states, let's say Texas and California, 2 places that I have called home previously, I can ask those follow-up questions and continue iterating through my analysis. Let's make this a bar chart, and I can see that profit is sort of heading in 2 different directions for California and Texas, and we can start looking at other levels of granularity here to help answer why that might be happening. So let's break this down by category, and you can see that I'm simply just typing in the terms here, and Ask Data is recognizing that fairly accurately. And immediately I can see that there's a couple of different categories like office supplies and furniture that are the leading contributors to sort of the negative profit here in Texas. I can also break this down more by subcategory if I want to, and get another lower level of detail into the data. And if I only want to limit this to Texas, I can use the refinement options of Ask Data, which allows me to click into any parts of the question here. So I can click into the filter of Texas and California, remove California, hit accept, and keep the scope of my visualization to the question of interest, which is just looking at Texas. So I can also quickly share this insight with others if that's important. But you can also embed Ask Data. As you can see with this button here, you can generate the HTML necessary to embed that into other web applications or even in parts of the Tableau ecosystem as well. And that's where we'll kind of walk through a couple of examples of how you might do that and why that's an interesting use case for many reasons. So let's head back to the slides. I'm going to close the tabs up here so I don't lose track. So when we talk about embedding Ask Data, there's really two different use cases and ways to embed Ask Data. The first is embedding it into other apps. So you can think about internal analytics portals that you may have at your company, or even other websites that you might have built for internal teams or even for external customers as well. And secondly, you can also embed Ask Data into Tableau dashboards themselves and bring Ask Data closer to your users who might be interacting with dashboards today and are typically asking follow-up questions that are generated from the dashboard but aren't necessarily answered by the dashboard. So I'll spend the rest of this time sort of walking through these two use cases and giving an idea of how you can embed Ask Data and make it much more extensible across your internal ecosystem as well as within Tableau as well. So let's take a look at the first example here of embedding Ask Data into other websites. So this is just an example. So if we go to tableau.com, you'll notice that we've published this brand new COVID-19 data hub, which has a lot of really helpful information and data around the coronavirus data. So if we scroll through the page, you'll notice that there's just a lot of content here. There's dashboards, there's examples of other visualizations that have been built by our community, and a lot of really other helpful information. But let's say you wanted to use Ask Data as another mechanism of making data more accessible to people. So you may think that this is a good use case of embedding Ask Data sort of in the context of this web page. So I have a data source here on sort of the COVID-19 data. It's a very simple data source here, as you can see on the left. So what I can do is leverage the built-in embedding capabilities of Ask Data, which is seen in this button right here. And once I click that, I'll see a few things. I'll see this preview of what the actual HTML will render, and you'll see the actual embed code below. And all this is the iframe HTML tag along with a couple of parameters which are just styling the iframe. So what I'll do is just copy this HTML. I'll open up my text editor here, which has the source code of that web page. And all I'm doing is simply pasting that iframe into the web page. And then I'll launch that web page locally that I have on my computer here. And you'll notice it's the same exact web page. I didn't really make any modifications with the exception of actually embedding Ask Data now into this web page. So you can see how simple it was to grab that HTML from Ask Data, embed it, and make it much more extensible into a website which I was looking to embed Ask Data into. And this works exactly like how you saw me demo Ask Data a few minutes ago with Superstore, and I can ask those questions directly here in this web page. So if I want to ask questions like how many cases in Texas by county, I can ask those questions right there and make Ask Data much more accessible into the workflows or into the pages that my users are navigating to and accessing. So that's just one example of how you might leverage Ask Data in the context of embedding it into an external website. A couple things to mention here. You might notice that there's a few bits of functionality that are removed from this embedding view. Specifically, if we go back to the data source, you'll see the ability to save and share the links are not visible in this view, but we are working on adding new parameters which allow you to choose whether or not those options to save and share the links would show up in this view. So you'll have control on whether or not you want to hide those or enable those bits of functionality for your users. Okay, so that's one example of how you might leverage an embedded version of Ask Data into a website. So let's walk through some examples of how you might embed Ask Data directly into Tableau dashboards themselves. So let's navigate to just a sample dashboard that I have here, which is just a fictitious dashboard for a CFO, and there's a bunch of just financial metrics that are incorporated in this dashboard. It's pretty common that dashboards don't answer all the questions that our users have, and that's actually perfectly okay. And Ask Data is a great way to empower your users to ask those follow-up questions when they arise. And oftentimes people have additional questions when they're looking at pre-published content like dashboards. So we'll walk through an example of how you can embed Ask Data directly into the dashboard to make it more accessible again to people who are already accessing Tableau reports and dashboards. So what I'll do is leverage existing Tableau capabilities through the Objects panel to start this embedding. So I will select a floating container. It can be horizontal or vertical, doesn't matter. And I'll just place that wherever I want to embed Ask Data. I'll just size the window to my liking, and I will toggle this as a show hide option. So this allows me to open and close the container. I'll just move the button to a different position and then just size that as well. The next step is actually to embed Ask Data now as a web page into this container. So what I'll do is I will take a tiled web page, drop that into the container, and for the URL, all I'm doing is going to the data source and grabbing the Ask Data URL. So in this case, you don't have to grab an embedded code because we really just want to render the view that we're seeing here. And I will add that as a URL into this container. I'll hit OK. And I should see a preview of how Ask Data would render in this specific dashboard. I can customize the button to my liking. So I'll just edit the button when I can choose any specific image that I want to use. So I'll just use this kind of chat icon that I already have. I'll hit OK. I'll just hide this for now. And that's pretty much it. I'll save the dashboard, and then I'll open it up in sort of a viewing mode so you can see how this interaction would work. So when we're looking at it from a viewing perspective, you'll notice that it's the same exact dashboard, but now I just have this sort of container appear. And by selecting that container or this button here, I can actually, open up Ask Data and answer follow-up questions that I may not have been able to answer directly from the visualizations that are in the dashboards. And again, this is just all the same capabilities of Ask Data that you saw previously. I can ask questions about the data source directly, such as how many employees I have by country, or any other things that aren't answered by the dashboard. And it's just a great way of bringing Ask Data closer to your users and giving them the ability to answer their own questions, especially when not all the questions can be answered in a given dashboard. Another example of how you can embed Ask Data into dashboard is by actually just giving it more real estate. So I have a new tab here, just to give you an example of another way you might consider embedding Ask Data. So I've just created sort of a web zone that takes up the entire real estate of the dashboard, and then just added some text and title as context. So I used the same URL, but just again used a larger web object that takes up the entire real estate to just give everyone another option of kind of bringing Ask Data closer into the dashboard. So those are a couple examples of how you can think about embedding Ask Data and extending it directly into other websites using our embedded capability, or actually bring closer to the dashboard by just leveraging the data source and Ask Data URL. So those are a couple of examples of how you can think about Ask Data in an embedded context. One last thing that I want to quickly show is something that we've worked on in previous hackathons, and it's something that we are considering as part of a future addition to the Ask Data embedded portfolio, is looking at ways of extending the Ask Data capabilities through an API, and specifically allowing for other possible integrations outside of Tableau, such as integrations with Slack or other messaging tools. And so we can see in this example, this is just a video that I'll show here, is this is a prototype. So this is nowhere near ready. And what we're doing is we've exposed the Ask Data service and integrated with Slack. So what you can do and what you see here is the ability to ask those questions directly through Slack. So all you're seeing here is a question that's being asked sort of in this thread. And similar to how I asked follow-up questions, you can continue to ask additional questions, and you'll see those responses come back directly sort of in that thread type experience that you see in Slack. So this is all about enabling users to answer questions in the modality that is sort of better for them. And just want to quickly highlight future possibilities of embedding with Ask Data. This is just a prototype, and we are considering this as part of future roadmap additions, but just thought I'd share a preview into the art of what is possible in the future of embedding with Ask Data. So that's all the content I had, and I know that there's a couple of questions that came in, so I'm happy to pause here for some Q&A if there's any questions.
So I don't know about the participants, but this is really cool stuff. And it's just a whole nother way of looking at things that I'm really excited about. We haven't done a lot yet, but with all of the embedding capability, I'm absolutely certain that there are sections of our user base who are going to find this really powerful. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it looks like one question did come in the chat from Luis. He says, hello, everyone. One question. I use all my dashboards with extracts. Can I use Ask Data with data source with extract?
Absolutely. As long as it's a published data source, extracts are actually our recommendation of how to use Ask Data. So that should work. That should work well as long as it's a published data source.
It looks like a few more questions came in. So one of them being, can you convert an Ask Data session into a web edit session?
Yes, absolutely. I skipped that part of the demo for brevity purposes, but once you ask a question, let's just grab an example here. You can save the content as a Tableau workbook. So once you save this, and my bandwidth at home is a little bit slow, so this question is taking a second. But if you see the save icon here, once you save this as a workbook, you can open this up directly into a web editing session.
Awesome. And then it looks like there's a few more questions. Lee is asking, how does the web part embedding work from desktop?
So as long as you have a published workbook, you can leverage those embedded capabilities. So there shouldn't be any constraints around using that in desktop. Although sometimes the browser rendering, if you're offline, obviously it won't, unless you're connected.
Okay, and then I have two more. Michael Perlow is asking, is there any recommendations on modeling data sources to be effective for use with Ask Data?
a great question. So there is some data curation that is recommended prior to getting started with Ask Data. Oftentimes, when we think about the raw schema of the data source, it's curated for a different use case. And with natural language querying, it's really helpful to make sure that data is comprehensible by the people who are asking questions about it. And it helps with just a general understanding of what data is available for business users who may not be familiar with self-service, but it also helps increase the precision and accuracy of the results that come back with Ask Data. So there's a lot of really great information that we've published. More recently, we have a blog post that outlines all the steps that I just walked through for embedding Ask Data into the dashboard. And there's also links here for our best practices on how to curate data for Ask Data. So I definitely recommend checking out our help content. There's some really helpful guides there for data curation.
Thanks, Rob. I have one last one. In the example of embedding Ask Data in a dashboard, does the Use Ask Data button get provisioned automatically?
That's a good question. So as you might see here in this toolbar, there is an Ask Data button here, and that shows up by default for all workbooks that are connected to published data sources. So if I click on this button, the behavior is really just navigating to that data source and defaulting to sort of the Ask Data view of the data source. We are working on capabilities right now that will allow you to hide this button in the scenario where you have Ask Data embedded in the dashboard and you don't want to give several different options of getting to Ask Data. So in the not too distant future, you will be able to sort of hide this button on your own if that's something that you'd like to do.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have one more question that just came in. Do we have time? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So Han is asking, let's say you embed Ask Data to a dashboard, then embed that dashboard to a secure client-facing web portal through iframe. Would that work if the Tableau server is hosted on a different server and domain than the web portal?
So when you embed Ask Data as iframe into sort of external sites, your users have to be provisioned a Tableau license. If you're using trusted tickets, which is whitelisting the Tableau server, that can help sort of circumvent the login process for people accessing that iframe. So that, in theory, should work. And if it doesn't, I would love for you to reach out to me and so we can figure out what the complications might be. But in theory, yes, that should work.
Okay, thanks, Ruho. I think those are all the questions that I have.
Great. Well, that's all the content that I had today. If there are questions that come up, please reach out through sort of the TUG group, and I'd be happy to get connected with anyone if there's offline questions. So appreciate your time again for all the thoughtful questions. And Jeff, I'll pass it back over to you.
Looks like I can see your slide, or at least PowerPoint, not in slideshow mode. And it looks like you're still on mute when you're ready to get started.
I don't know how to unmute. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
All right. All right. Well, thanks everybody for taking the time to stick around and listen to some of this. I promise my presentation will be much less technical than what you've just heard. Just to give you a little background on myself, my name is Robert Bassaraba. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Projects for a data processing cooperative called Southeastern Data. We are essentially an ERP provider to the electric distribution utility market. Currently, we serve some 300 of these across the country. Our applications include financial, customer service, or what's commonly referred to as CIS or billing, mapping applications, work management, essentially these solutions that we deliver, they span everything from back office to a guy that's working 60 feet in the air in a bucket truck. So our Tableau story began back in 2014, and so now we're in the process. We've gone through several mergers and acquired another company, and so we're merging all these into a new core application and are in the process of embedding this content or much of our content into our core applications. So I would just say as sort of a starter, we feel like we've significantly enhanced our value proposition to these customers through doing this. Today, I'm going to walk you guys through something that we developed recently, and we actually monetize this suite of dashboards that we share out to our customers. I don't have time, unfortunately, to go through the entire depth of the whole thing, but my point would be to try and give everybody a sort of a baseline of something that we've done that brings a lot of value to our users. So here we go. So as I mentioned, the electric distribution industry is kind of it's really an interesting vertical to be in. It starts off with your nuclear power plants, your gas-fired plants that generate all this electricity, and they put it down those giant transmission lines that you see running along the highway and stuff into your local substation. And so, you know, you hear these stories, oh, the electric grid, it's old and it's antiquated and all that. And I would say to you that that's partially true. Some of it is old and antiquated, but on the other side of that is, you know, an infrastructure that's littered with sensors and I mean lots of them. So for this presentation, I'm going to stick mostly to the metering side of things, but I wanted to point out that this is really just scratching the surface. And usually this type of presentation would take me probably well over an hour. I know I don't have that kind of time, so you guys are going to get the condensed version. So the gist of it is here is, you know, you have this electricity comes in through these giant transmission lines. It goes to what's called a local substation. From there, it's fed out to it's transformed down, then fed out to neighborhoods, businesses, and so forth. With me. Okay, so this market, just to kind of give you guys an idea, the electric co-ops are not-for-profits, and so we serve not-for-profit utilities. And the difference being is that they don't have rates that are designed to drive money and revenue for shareholders. They try to provide the service at the lowest possible cost, and then they're tax-exempt organizations. So they basically refund a percentage of their margins every year to their customers, and with that model, they're tax-exempt. So in the United States, there are 42 million Americans served by electric cooperatives. SEDC essentially represents 1/3 of that marketplace, right? And so again, everything from the guys in the field to the people in the office to people in operations, and so it's very rich in terms of its data. The current stack that I'm gonna talk about that we've sort of built out here, our core production systems run on Oracle for all of our transactional data, all the cash register data. A lot of the financial processing is all done in Oracle, and I would say we use more of it than I would care to admit, and so obviously it's caused challenges for us as we've grown and as our data population has gotten bigger and bigger. So we started then, you know, looking at options, and we ended up on Snowflake. That's a whole other story of how we got there. But keep in mind that with metering, the metering market has changed so much that it's forced us to go into an environment that can handle that volume of data. So we began to pipeline data into Snowflake via Matillion, and then our Tableau environment sits on top of that so that we can sort of leverage the back-end power of Snowflake in order to do some of the analytics. And so just sort of on the surface of Snowflake, I know they're a newer company. I would tell you that we got into it at a reasonable price point. There was a lot of benefit for us. We didn't have a lot of, it wasn't this giant environment that we had to migrate over. Metering data is pretty static and it's pretty basic. So it's just, there's a lot of it. So give you a little background there. So our data explosion, primarily in metering, and I like to call this meter data math, but the example really illustrates the explosion that we've seen in the data. I mean, because historically your utility would have like a manual process to read your meter. They literally sent readers into the field. They would go to every location. They would key in a reading on a handheld device. They'd bring that back at the end of the day, and they would load it into the system. Well, this was like, I guess the best example I could give you is like a ballet, right? They literally have these complex routes that take them the shortest distance from meter to meter to meter to meter in order to do this. Well, the technology then started to change, and they started to use like low frequency radio-based modules that they put in the meter. And then the utility could literally drive a meter reading vehicle down the street, and it would pick up and receive all these signals. And so that sped up that whole market. Flash forward a couple of years, and something got introduced called power line carrier, which is basically the ability of a utility to read your meter over the power lines. And that solution worked really well in our use case because co-ops are mostly rural. I mean, we have some that are very, urban, and some of the urban markets where they were rural, but like a lot of the co-ops around the city of Atlanta here where we're based have gotten very much bigger because of the growth of Atlanta. So things that were rural at one time really aren't rural anymore. And so they put these power line carriers out there because they could read meters that were 30, 40, 50 miles away. And so it was a really good solution for them. The problem was that there was distortion on the lines, and so it limited the amount of data you could bring back, right? So the industry has again continued to flash forward, but just to give you guys an example of the math, you can see the percentage of increase that they experience in terms of their data. When you go from reading one time a month, which is what they were doing, to one time a day, that's literally a 2,900% increase. So I've done the math on it so that you can see the numbers, but thinking about a 50,000 meter utility reading on 15-minute interval data, he collects 1.7 billion intervals, and that doesn't even count all of the distribution sensors or the various channels that they can read on a meter. So you can read various different dimensions on that meter, if you will, and collect that data for different things. And so you start to do this, and again, I said our production system was an Oracle warehouse. Well, you start getting into some of those queries, and it's not fun on Oracle. I literally felt like I could melt a machine down that was running Oracle with Tableau. So that led us into a project with the North Carolina Statewide, which is essentially the statewide organization that represents the co-ops in the state of North Carolina. And they were a little bit different. They actively are involved in microgrids and something called DERMS. And microgrids basically means they have like little power, like batteries. They have energy sources so that in the event of a hurricane now in some of these areas, they can literally, flip from using the main production, power lines that are coming in to this backup model that would give them up to 7 days of power in the event that they saw an outage, which you do see in these hurricane zones. So they had these big, they had this big need to facilitate that environment, and they also had a need to do something called DERMS, which is shedding of peak and load data, or load, energy load on the system. And so I'm going to talk about that in a second, but essentially what we did was we took all of our customers in North Carolina, put their data in Snowflake, and exposed that consumption data to their statewide in one place, something that was just not possible in our existing environment. And I know I'm going fast here, so I mean, if you guys are interested in some of this stuff afterwards, I am happy to talk to you or show you something offline. This is our current Snowflake environment, which is 28 users as of the 21st of April. And you can see here that we currently house over 104 billion rows of data. So you can imagine, I mean, it's just growing and growing and growing. And a customer at one point had made the comment to me that, hey, literally, we're doing this on Oracle. We feel like we have to torture the data out of the system, just to compare day-to-day things. So I just wanted to give you an idea of the scale of this. So the suite that we developed is sort of like an analysis of peak usage. And so what is peak usage and why is it so important? So in this example, you're looking at 1 year's worth of data. So this is a utility collecting data. We rolled this up to the hourly level. So you're looking at 24 hours worth of data over a 1 year period of time. And you can see the one axis is kilowatt hours, so it's like total consumption. And across the bottom there, you see that row of red. And what that is that's how much of that total energy is actually peak energy, right? And so by isolating that tells us a lot. And I know, you know, if you're not in the industry, it's sort of like, well, how much value does that bring, right? Well, this is something that was very difficult to do in Oracle. And it represents approximately 5%, between 5 and 6% of the total amount of energy consumed. But at this utility, that was literally 30% of their wholesale cost. So understanding the impact of peak energy and peak consumption has a huge financial impact on their business. So with our stack, with our Tableau Snowflake stack, we've been able to understand the data like never before. And when you can reduce peak consumption, even by fractions of a percent, there's huge dollars associated with it. So our analysis started to continue to go down the road of understanding that peak consumption, and then moving into something that's called coincident peak. And what that means is it's how many customers on their lines experienced a peak in the same interval that the utility experienced its global peak. And what that tells you about the users is that says, hey, the people that are in that category that were themselves peaking at the time the utility was, those are the people that are really driving cost for them, right? And they know they're out there. They just didn't know up to this point who they were, right? Or how to identify them. And it's a really, really critical piece of information because it tells them who we need to focus our energy management programs on. So we continued down this road. And again, I want to emphasize, without Tableau, this is not possible, at least to my knowledge. I would never have known where to start with this using conventional tools. So when you start looking at that, then we said, okay, let's break this thing down even further. And, you know, so what you're seeing here is we started binning the customers together, and we said, okay, if these customers were in the peak, in the daily peak, how many times were they in the daily peak, and what kind of consumption did they use? So if you take this and you look at the group of 6 and you go everything to the right of 6, and this was taken from, as I recall, we did this on the peak month for the utility. But anybody that's been in that was coincident 6 times or more is a candidate for an energy management program. So now they know exactly who these people are, right? So they don't have to send out 100,000 pieces of, pieces of marketing to say, hey, try these energy management programs, or consider, a thermostat, or consider, some other type of load management switch, or jump on a time of use rate, or any of the offerings that they sort of have. They know exactly who these people are, and they know exactly who to offer those solutions to. So that's a really big deal. We identified scenarios also through this analysis where they were literally, a big business was able to realize that if they slowed down their production and went to a 3-shift production instead of going to a 2-shift and then having to start all this equipment back up, that they actually saved money just because of the cost of the inductive loads from starting this heavy equipment up and shutting it down. So again, this is SEDC as a software provider using Tableau as a tool to help deliver value to our customer. And these analyses have big dollars associated with them. So we're very proud of the work that we've done with it. This is a correlation matrix that we developed in this suite. And basically what we started doing was we started calculating energy intensity across the system. And then we would start grouping these customers together by various attributes. And so you can see in this example, what you're seeing is sort of a box that's representative of the number of customers, and then the color within it based on the intensity of that group. And so we did this across some 20 different attributes at each utility. And you can see here that mobile homes are very energy intense. Well, this is intuitive from the standpoint that you sort of knew that mobile homes were energy intense, but now this is the data telling you that, right? So it's no longer just an assumption. It can be considered fact. So while their overall total consumption is low, if you look at the amount of energy they consume for their physical footprint, it's really high. So Good information to know. There are marketing programs for those scenarios. We also looked at different attributes. In this case, the type of construction, breaking this down. And I mean, we literally went through 20-some different attribute analysis in order to figure out how to place these customers. Here this is telling you that the metal frames are not good. It's not a good attribute to have. And so what those are at this particular utility are these are these industries or businesses that pop up that feed large corporations that are on their lines. And so they slap up a metal frame, come in, open up shop, and, that's energy efficiency isn't their number one priority, right? So when you drill into this, this is a screen that I grabbed that sort of literally tells you now we're down to the customer level. So we know what customers are energy efficient relative to their peers. And then we start to look at the different attributes and say, why is that so? And how do we improve those markers? Because when you get down to this level of detail, you can really, really target the types of programs that will cut your peak consumption or hopefully, shave some of that. And we really just kept going on. This is one giant level of detail examination, really. So this is an example of overlaying the satellite images on it. So you can see things like people that have pools and, let's look at a neighborhood and go, okay, is this a neighborhood? Is this marker based on the year of construction? Is it, what do these things have that are addressable from the provider standpoint that can help? And I'll give you an example of some of that. But learning how to validate some of these things and, is it a well pump I'm looking at? I've connected to the location, I've looked it up, and, is it a well pump? Is it a pool that's causing a problem? Who knows exactly what it is, but by taking all these pieces of information and wrapping them together, we've been able to do some pretty amazing things. So again, the first thing I would say, the big win here is now they know exactly who to market what to. So they're not just sending things out en masse, hoping that they get this small percentage of people, to opt in and move the needle. And why that's important in smaller utilities or the market that we serve is, if I have 2 million customers and I send out all this literature and I get, participants back from that are fractions of a percent, well, fractions of a percent of a huge number are much higher. So it shows like the needle's moving. But if you're talking about, a rural utility that has 30,000 customers and a lot of farmland and is very spread out, you have to know who to send this stuff to, because if you get a percentage of a smaller number, it's not really helping you. And so they have tons of these efficiency programs, and they really hammer their customers with them now for things like energy audits. And I'm going to talk about that, where the utility comes out and says, hey, look, you need some insulation or you need some other type of, improvement. And in some cases, they actually do efficiency loans or give credits on the bill in order to help get that done to make these customers more efficient. And so the moral of the story here is once the utility uses this data to better understand their customer, they can build an effective marketing program for them. So if it's an energy audit for a mobile home, if it's a load management switch, if it's a given type of rate, they can better mark the customer for those programs. And, they don't have to send 50,000 advertisements or messages to the 1,500 customers it applies to. So pretty interesting. So the end of our analysis really took us to this place. We built this giant jitter plot, and what it's telling you is across the top of the screen, I said we had correlated 20 of those different attribute buckets. And so what we did was we scored every customer on the system, and we said, we added up all the good attributes and we subtracted out all the bad ones. And basically we said, if you have a bad attribute, we're going to add a point. If you have a good attribute, we're going to take a point away. And so we summed up all the attributes and said, okay, this is your final score and you're in this bucket. And then we placed them in the bucket and then ran an intensity analysis on them, and it sort of graded them. And so what does this tell you? I know this obviously in this short period of time, I can't go into all the details on it, but basically what this is telling you is you go farther to the left, these people have really good attributes. So the people that are in the top left quadrant up here, they have really good attributes and real poor energy habits, right? So these are people that you market your time of use rates to, because for all intents and purposes, they should have good energy signatures, right? The people below them have really good locations and really good profiles. So these are just really good customers. When you start going the other direction, you start seeing people that they have really bad physical properties. So these are your energy audits. These are people that you want to put, more efficient hot water heaters, that you want to sell efficient, energy efficient appliances to, market things and programs that can actually help them or try to offset the fact that they have poor physical properties, right? We figured the ones below them that had poor physical properties but had good profiles were just people that cared about their bill, right? Because for all, based on what the data is telling us, that they should be in that upper band, but they're not. So we figured these are the people that are shutting off lights. These are the people that are not using energy during peak times. These are just really, really good customers. And then sort of the higher you go up on the chart, that means your demand or your peak consumption is worse. So those people are really people they want to market to and potentially do switches. Sorry. So, I would just end this by saying, and I know I'm a little bit over, but I would just end this by saying, as a Tableau partner, what we're trying to do is, we're trying to use this stack and we're trying to use these tools to enhance our value proposition with our customers. And, it's taken off for us. But I like to think that our customers are no different than yours. And when you start showing a good and solid value add, your customers will jump into that, and it's a good opportunity for you. And again, we've monetized some of the development that we've done just in the analysis. So, but again, I understand our situation is a little bit unique, but I'd be happy to talk to anybody about it, sort of tell you our objectives. The one thing I would also share with the group is that that makes us unique is SEDC is largely on-premise deployment, so we do have that variable of having local systems that we have to contend with. So, but other than that really was my presentation for today. I would love to go into more time because I don't feel like I do it justice in a short presentation because there's so much material there that goes into that. But I just felt like it was good to share a good business use case with the group, and certainly interested in hearing feedback if you guys have it. So thoughts, questions, comments? Everybody stick around, everybody gone?
I don't see any. Go ahead.
It looks like one came in. How did you define those colors or the attribute correlation matrix? Also, can you elaborate on the process that you took to make the attribute correlation matrix?
Okay, so I could give you there's two answers to that question. The first one is the colors. What we did was we actually went ahead and we made a hybrid data source that utilized the mapping system from a lat-long standpoint of where the meters were, and we joined that up with a public data source, that partial data that we obtained from Pitney Bowes. And then we put that all in Snowflake, and we ran some calculations where we determined what the energy intensity was of the utility as a whole, and then that was sort of our baseline value. And then we said, okay, what's everyone's value? That baseline value basically set our color gradient. So the people that were on the low end of it shifted more towards the blue, and the people that were on the high end of it shifted more towards the red. And so that's where the color pattern comes from, is basically that calculation. So that's where that came in. What was the second part?
The second part said, also, can you elaborate on the process that you took to make the attribute correlation matrix?
The process was essentially taking that calculation for the energy intensity and essentially grouping together all of the customers on the system that fell into a given attribute category, like mobile home, for example. Everybody that was on mobile home, we ran a calculation on, and here was their score. And everybody that was not, we ran it, and here was their score. And so some of that data is, you have to interpret it a little bit because you need a little context of what you're looking at. but basically we did that for each one of those attributes. And then we said, okay, here's where your end is. And again, using Snowflake, we were able to make these calculations on a full 1 year period of time or on a monthly period of time. And we can go to whatever level of detail we want, but we haven't run into a scenario. This was announced in February, and we haven't run into a scenario yet where we really got down to the daily level. I mean, we're at the month level right now. So you can see seasonal trends and things, but that was really it. I'd be happy to have certainly contact me if you want to have an offline discussion about the exact processes we were using, because this was a team of people that we had doing this, and I'd be happy to help anyone any way I can with that.
Those are the only questions I have.
Okay, well, everybody, I would just say, thank you for taking the time to listen today and to sort of see what we're doing. And we're really excited about hopefully getting this group on track and sharing information and working as a community moving forward. So.
Yep. Yeah, we're a little bit over, so won't do any formal wrap up. I just put a link to a Google form. We're hoping to get some feedback from the group on things that you'd like to see in future meetings. So we'd really appreciate it if you'd go ahead and fill out that form, so we've got some data-driven information about what we want to do going forward.
Well said.
Yep. Also, just I just say my team now has the featured viz in the Tableau COVID data hub. So if you want to see something that we're doing with embedded analytics and specifically around COVID, if you go ahead and look at that data hub and then look at the featured viz, that's something that we worked on over the last week or two. So anyway, again, over time, thanks for attending and thanks for sticking it out to the end. And we're looking forward to hopefully seeing you in July 9th, which will be our next meeting.
All right, guys, thank you very much.
All right, thanks everybody, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you, Jeff.